Hi guys, today I wanted to do a book review. Now the book that I'm going to be reviewing is this one here, which is Paganism, an Introduction to Earth-Based Religions. I keep wanting to say spirituality, but religions. And this is by Joyce and Higginbotham. Now this is one of the books that I identified that I wanted to read as part of my own depth year 2019, and that's where I got intentional about the books that I actually wanted to do a bit of a study on, and rather than just sort of like pick it willy-nilly. So I spent some time online having a look at people's reviews on this, and it was quite a positive, they got quite positive reviews on Goodreads and on Amazon and places like that, so I decided to purchase my own copy. Now the Higginbothams are based in the US, and they have been active in the pagan community for a number of decades. Having a look at some of the interviews that they have posted online, it looks like they both started down that path in the 80s. So in terms of contemporary works, this is pretty much the only one that I have seen of theirs. If you can hear noises outside, it is starting to rain and thunder, so that's probably what those noises are. It also mentions in those interviews that they have also taught paganism and been spokespeople for the pagan community, or their particular pagan community, as well as organising festivals and things of that nature. So they are obviously quite knowledgeable, having taken on that teaching or mentor role. The size of the book itself is not quite, at least not quite a standard Australian textbook size. It is not sort of like a novel, and it is not super thick. But however, looks can be deceiving, because this actually took me, almost 2 months to get through, especially considering I was doing all of the activities as they came up and doing the journaling and everything. So even though this doesn't look super thick, it is quite intensive if you go in with the idea that you're going to complete a lot of these exercises. So this isn't sort of like a quick flick through or a quick read. If that's something that you're looking for, this is not it. This is quite involved. I can imagine that this book would be an excellent resource in a comparative religion course, or some sort of like religion class, something of that nature, where you do studies of the different some of the different popular religions out there, and even some of the notes on the activities. There are notes for the teacher or the workshop leader, that sort of thing as well. So this is definitely something that I can see being used as like a classroom text. Now the reason I chose this book in particular was because it focuses on paganism in a general, as an overview sort of a way. It doesn't drill straight down into particular traditions. They do mention traditions in here, such as the Wiccan tradition and other sort of pagan-based spiritualities, as the title states. But the reason I got this was specifically so that I can sort of zoom out and look at paganism as a whole, as opposed to looking specifically at one type of tradition. The very first book, or the only book that I was able to get from the library to start off with, was a Scott Cunningham book, which was on the solitary practitioner. So obviously that was an introduction to paganism for me, but it was a Wiccan tradition, and I know a lot of other people have had that experience too, where they've come to paganism through Wicca, because that is one of the, I guess, most widely known and widely written about and widely available resources out there. So I really wish that this was something that I had read before that, just so that it would have given me an excellent overview of that without going into the details that Wicca does go into. And just a disclaimer, I have nothing against the Wiccan tradition or anything like that. It's just I wanted something that was a little bit more broad, something that maybe, I guess highlighted for me that Wicca is not the only way, Wicca is not the only tradition and only path that you can go down, that there are other ways as well. So that's the only reason why I would have chosen to read a text like this first, if I'd had the opportunity, but you don't always have the opportunity and the means and the finances to be able to you know, further your study. And I really, I suppose I am a little bit traditional in that way. I really like a text. I really like to be able to flick through a book. I appreciate there are a lot of resources online, both you know, visual and you know, there are articles and posts and all sorts of things that are available online, but sometimes I really just want to have that that hard copy, that text, as well as we all know that there is that sort of Wikipedia, be careful what you read, you know, sort of, it's very editable, it's very, you know, you have to watch your sources basically. So there's always that as well when you are looking at things online. So that's why I was really excited to pick up the book. So let's talk about some of the things that I liked. So the very first thing that I liked was obviously that it was an overview and that it was very structured. Right off the bat, it tells you this is not the only way. This is just, you know, I guess an overview. There are many different ways and people do things many different ways, but here's like a general consensus, like the sort of like backbone of what many pagans believe, or what many pagans may do, what many pagans may recognize, those sorts of things. So it's definitely not this is the book and this is the way that you must practice. So I really liked that, and I really liked the structure. It deals with so I'll read you the table of contents, or at least the chapter headings, and it gives you a really good introduction. It doesn't sort of go too specific. So the first one is, what is paganism? So the general characteristics, what does the word pagan mean? Where do pagans come from? An earth-centered religion, the wheel of the year, rites of passage, what is a ritual, things like that. The second chapter is you are what you believe. How do beliefs work? What is a belief system? Claiming the power to choose your own beliefs. Chapter 3, a pagan view of deity, so concepts of deity. What do pagans believe about deity? The God map and a God map story. Chapter number 4 is, what about Satan? How do pagans view Satan? Pagans, witches and bad reputations. Why witch hunts? A look at the biblical witch bias, the social roles of Satan, the mythological roles of Satan. Who is a Satanist? Chapter number 5 is the living universe, the current Western mindset, unbroken wholeness, science and a magical universe, the universe as a cosmic TV, personal experience and a magical universe. Chapter 6, magic, the mechanics of magic, the applications of magic, the limitations of magic. And the last chapter is ethics and personal responsibility. Who are you? The multidimensional self, the afterlife, ethics, what are they? The Western religious ethic, ethics, the pagan approach. Now, that is not every single topic in every chapter, but that just gives you an overview as to what is covered in each of the chapters. So I thought it was very logically structured, and I thought it gave like an excellent overview, and it talked about some of the things that you don't always hear about, or you don't sort of consciously think about when you are starting out on this path. So I was really happy to see the structure was something that was really easy to follow. Another thing I really liked were the exercises. Now, the exercises really got you thinking in some cases. There were a lot of visualizations towards the end of the book as well. And sometimes it would get you to reflect as per a journal, like open-ended questions, and other times it would sort of ask you questions that were really pointed and relating to the particular chapter that was just covered, or the particular section in the chapter. So that was something I also really liked, as it was a good way to digest what you just read, especially, and to break it up a little bit, especially in some of the chapters which were quite dense, especially the discussion as when you get to sort of like science and magic and the sort of like quantum theory and things like that. There was one particular chapter especially that I thought that the exercises sort of broke the chapter up a little bit, because it was quite a dense read, and it was something that I think I'm still going to need to go back and read a couple of times to really digest it, because it's something that is really hard to wrap my own mind around. So for example, this is on the living universe, and some of the headings in the particular chapter are things like quantum theory, particles, the wave function, Bell's theorem and non-locality, is the universe a hologram, string theory, and paganism's perspective. So that was quite a dense read, and it's something that I think I will have to sort of go back and sort of look into a little bit more as well, as that's something that I don't think I fully comprehended. But they had a really good set, I guess, example or explanation on how what some of these theories actually mean in that particular chapter. But that was probably the only chapter that was super dense, and one where you don't want to be disturbed when you're reading it, because it was it requires, you can't be watching TV and read this, for example. So basically this is exactly what the cover says. This is an introduction to paganism, and it did everything that I wanted it to do, basically. So I'm really happy with my purchase, and I think it's something that I'm definitely going to come back to again. And that's something that they mention in this book as well, that especially the journaling questions, it is obviously you're doing the exercises at a fixed point in time, and that your beliefs and your ideas about paganism and about deity and all sorts of things is going to change over time. So it will be really interesting to see, in a couple of years from now, in 10 years from now, what is it that I believe as well. So in that way, I think it's a book that you can come back to as well, and so it's definitely one that I think I will hold on to, rather than sort of read it and pass it along, which is what I do with a lot of books. Now, there weren't actually really any negatives for me, or at least no true negatives. More things to be aware of. So the first thing to be aware of, I guess, is that some of the questions, so they have journaling questions, and then they have sort of questions to discuss, which if you're doing it yourself, you might want to journal about it or meditate about it, reflect on it, and also you could, I guess, discuss it in a classroom setting. So I suppose that would be a distinction there. It just so happens to be that I am doing a self-study, so I'm journaling about everything. So in the questions to discuss, for example, I did sometimes find, at least in the beginning, I wasn't giving myself enough time to do this, because I would have a look and see that, for example, maybe there were 5 questions, but within the 5 questions, there were actually questions within questions. So I'll read you an example. So this is on deity. So, and this is one point. What form did your inner temple take? How did you visualize deity, or your personal point of connection to the universe? Did it take a tangible form? Did you feel any emotions or sensations? So for example, for that one point, there was like 5 questions really to be answered. So sometimes, especially in the beginning, I didn't take enough time. If I'd sort of said to myself, okay, you have 15 minutes before you need to leave for work or something, I definitely didn't have enough time to process all that. So obviously once I realized that sometimes there can be questions within questions, I allowed myself to take longer, or to block out the time that I could to actually sit down and do some of these questions justice within a journaling setting. The other thing to be aware of is that there are a number of visualizations in this book, and I'll see if I can find one for you there we go. So here's one. You don't need to worry about the words, for example, but at the very top it has instructions. If this was in a classroom setting or a workshop, instructions to the person leading it. Then it literally goes through the text of the visualization. So for example, it starts off with, get in a comfortable position, let's focus on your breathing in and out, and let's count, things like that. So because this was obviously published 2002, and we need to consider what was around at the time, there's no CDs or anything, audio files to go along with this. And so I found that in one sitting I'd have to sit down and record myself reading this, and then I'd have to wait for a little bit, maybe a week, or like even just the next day, and then I'd replay it for myself so that I could go through the visualization, if it were. So that's something to be aware of, that it meant that I would take, you know, longer to sort of complete studying this book. So that's something else to be aware of. Now, it wasn't actually a negative for me, just something to be aware of, because, and I was actually really surprised. I expected that because I was reading the visualization, like recording it for myself, and because I was going to be aware of what I'd said, that it wouldn't be as effective, as relevant, that nothing really would be surprising or come out of it. And I was actually really surprised to say that was totally incorrect, especially for one visualization. The results that I had were really surprising, even though I knew what the content was about. So I can confidently say that even if you're listening to a recording of your own voice going through a visualization, it can definitely still be effective and still, you know, either get the point across or bring things up for you that you can reflect on. So that was actually really surprising. The only other thing, which I suppose it's more of a niggling thing at the moment, it's not anything huge, it's easily sort of glazed over if you want it to be, is that there's a question that pops up, and it's usually in the questions to discuss kind of section as opposed to the journaling section, and I got really sick of it. It sort of seemed a little bit maybe juvenile in one way, or something that you'd maybe really ask like a younger person, which is fine, just that I just found it not relevant in my particular circumstance. And so the question was, and in relation to the different chapters, how do you think your friends, family, neighbors, and co-workers would react to X? How would they react to you? You know, learning, studying about X, whatever it was, whatever it is. And to be honest, I really don't care. And I don't know if this is just to get people to sort of to open up and consider this question, but for me, I really don't care what my friends and family think about this, to be honest. And I know that some people, I guess, are out there, and maybe if you'd asked me 10 years ago, or no, probably like 20 years ago, or, you know, if I was a young teen, then this would probably be a much more pertinent question. But I just found that it was a bit of a useless question for me at this particular point in time. And I don't know if that also reflects on the particular time and place. So America 2002, I know there are a lot of religious areas, religious regions in the US. I don't know if it is sort of reflective of that as well, but I feel like Australia, for example, is much more non-practicing religious. So for example, my history is a non-practicing Protestant. My family wouldn't really care if I start reading about all this stuff. So and I don't know if that's because more American society, there are more people that are active in their religions, and, you know, attend church weekly and things like that. Yeah, so I really, anyway, that particular question, it was just something that I didn't personally connect with, and I just started skipping it. I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I'm overthinking the addition of that particular question, and it's just a question that they wanted to put in there to sort of create a discussion point. Overall, I would definitely highly recommend this book. The negatives to me, they're not really negatives, they're just things to be aware of, and then just one, you know, personal preference on a question, I suppose you would call it, and it's easily skippable. So all in all, this did exactly what it says on the cover. I highly recommend it, especially obviously if you're looking for an introduction to paganism. It's an excellent overview, and it is like logically structured. So I hope this review has been helpful to you, and I hope that if you were on the fence or if you were looking for a particular book to read on this topic, I hope it has helped you make up your mind one way or the other. I'll leave the name of the book and the authors in the description box below, so that you can follow up further if you would like to. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in another video.